So welcome everybody to the first in the 2020 Stormwater Management Manual series of trainings. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Adrienne Iona and I'm the manager for the team that put the swim together. Today I am joined by other folks on my team, Henry Stevens, Ivy Dunlap, and Alice Coker. I also want to acknowledge Amy Simpson, who's the other member of our team. She's just not participating in the presentation today. I'm going to start with an overview of our training schedule. So this is the first training in a series of 4 trainings that we're going to be doing for the rollout of the swim. It's a general overview today. In 2 weeks, we will be covering the material in chapters 1 and chapter 2, policy, site evaluations, and design. And that's a lot of the applicability stuff and site investigations. On the 28th, we'll be doing a training for the presumptive approach calculator. On the 4th in February, we'll be covering the design elements, so facility design and site design for both private and public facilities. Like I said, we're going to be recording all the trainings and posting them on our website. We're trying to organize the topics a little bit as modules so that hopefully you can kind of go in and look at just the certain segment that you're interested in. And feel free to reach out to us if there are any particular topics that you think are interesting, that you'd like us to cover in more detail. We still have some time to formulate those trainings. So if there's something that we need to put a little bit more emphasis on, we can still do that. I do want to say that today's presentation is basically a repeat of the general presentation that we've given a couple times during public comment period and prior to that. So if you feel like you've seen that presentation enough times and want to leave this meeting today, we will, our feelings won't be hurt. And maybe we'll see you in a couple weeks. All right. Now I'm going to dive into the schedule. So the manual was released on December 14th. And just as a reminder that also the source control manual was also posted on that day. I want to acknowledge that the deployment of the presumptive approach calculator is delayed. And so what we're going to do for that is whenever that's available, we're going to extend the grace period for when both manuals are overlap based on that availability date. Let's see. And then the way we're going to apply the manual. So during that 3-month grace period, either manual can be used. Land use reviews will be conducted under the manual in place at the time of submittal of a complete application. Building permits will be reviewed based on the permit end date. Public works projects will be reviewed based on the date of the concept development submittal is accepted for review. And city capital and interagency projects will be reviewed based on a 60% plan submittal date. Now I'm going to dive into the overview. This manual update we've done to improve clarity, to continue to comply with our regulations, and to increase the technical rigor and our facility performance. Quick reminder, the swim we require stormwater management for development activities that construct or alter impervious area. And we also protect drainage ways on private property. We have these requirements to comply with our broader environmental regulatory requirements, to protect watershed health, and to meet our stormwater system needs. So this rewrite was a completely comprehensive rewrite. There's been major updates to many elements of the manual, including the language, the organization, the triggers, the hierarchy, the water quality storm, our flow control standards, requirements and guidance for geotechnical investigations, a full kind of redo of the Green Street details, and a reorganization of the drainage reserve requirements and guidance. We have a new table of contents. This has been arranged to better kind of align with users and kind of how you would approach the manual. So I'm going to start with chapter 1 here, which covers requirements and applicability. Okay, so our pavement triggers, some of them have changed and some of them are staying the same. We still have the 500 square foot threshold for creation of new and redevelopment of existing impervious area. We have exemptions for pavement maintenance or repair, utility trenching, and base repair of public streets that are when it's less than 50%. The big thing that we've changed is we have our new definition of what counts as maintenance, and it allows exposure of the underlying gravel. So if you we consider it replacement or redevelopment if that underlying soil is exposed. And this allows for replacement of concrete and to have that be considered maintenance, because prior to that, really only grind and overlay qualified. The major changes in our exemptions for pavement work is we're removing some exemptions, including we're removing the blanket exemptions for sidewalk and ADA only projects. And those are now going to trigger unless it's considered maintenance. However, these projects will be eligible to pay the special circumstances fee using our new staff review special circumstance process, and that doesn't require additional design justification. Locations with existing curb will now trigger stormwater if they meet the other triggering criteria. So we're also not using that rule anymore. We've changed the hierarchy where we've separated out the selection of the facility from the selection of the discharge point. And we've collapsed some of our discharge points. So now we have level 1, which is on-site infiltration, and that just really specifies that the primary goal of the manual is to infiltrate as much on-site as possible. That can be with a surface facility or UIC. We have an exemption for sites that construct a qualifying eco-roof. Level 2 is now the offsite discharge to a storm-only system, and level 3 is offsite discharge to the combined system. So there's that decision point, and then a separate decision point is the facility type that you select, and we continue to prioritize infiltration vegetated facilities, and that's to acknowledge sort of the benefits of those systems. We made a fair number of changes to engineering and design assumptions that will impact facility sizing. We're increasing the water quality design storm. We've changed some flow control standards. We've changed some engineering assumptions that impact facility sizing, including the infiltration rate of the growing medium and setting pre-development curve numbers. In aggregate, these changes mostly impact the size for fully lined vegetated facilities and facilities with under drains that are designed using the PAC. Overall, there are minimal changes to simplified approach facilities.
Hey, Adrian,
yeah.
We're still getting some fading. People are reporting fading. Maybe could you speak up a little bit? I don't know if it has to do with how loud you are.
Okay. So when you add all these things up, here's kind of a summary of how they impact facility sizes throughout the city, depending on what their design goals are. The largest impacts are to facilities in the separated system, the water quality only facilities, and facilities that are providing flow control and water quality in the separated area. Those get a little bit bigger. Facilities in the combined system and in areas that have on-site infiltration will likely get smaller. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah.
Okay. So chapter 2 covers facility selection and sizing. It starts with selecting your design approach and discusses the applicability of the simplified, presumptive, and performance approaches, and provides more specific lists for which projects can use which design approach. And then we have more details on site evaluation, including looking at the location of your site, the setbacks required, and geotechnical and subsurface investigations, including infiltration testing and thinking about things like landslide hazards. And then there's a whole section on facility selection, sizing, and design. We've done a complete overview and review from a geotechnical perspective, and from that have provided additional guidance and requirements for geotechnical investigations and groundwater investigations and infiltration testing. We're asking for more information on bore logs when they're done. We've added a little bit more guidance around depth to groundwater measurements when that's required, and we've reduced the amount of time needed to do those investigations. We've also provided a lot more information around infiltration tests. We're setting the maximum required testing depth at 30 feet. Sites can still go deeper than that, but that's as deep as BES will require. We've reduced the requirement for the pre-soaking time. We've specified the size of the pit required for the pit test, and we've provided additional specific guidance for encased falling head and direct infiltration tests. We've added more guidance for sites that want to infiltrate into fill or onto sites that have contamination. Generally, BES's perspective is that we prefer to not infiltrate in these situations, but we've provided guidance for sites that would like to justify infiltration in these conditions. We've made a couple changes to site design requirements. The escape route is now a recommendation instead of a requirement. And we've changed the setbacks to allow a 0 setback to the property line adjacent to the right-of-way. We've incorporated all of these changes into a full update of the PAT calculator, and that is pending. We are furiously working on getting that ready, and so hopefully we'll have that out in the next couple weeks. All right, good. Henry, you're up. Hopefully your internet will be better.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great, okay, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, so chapter 3 in the new SWIM is devoted to private facilities. We sometimes refer to them as parcel-based facilities also, to distinguish them from facilities in the right-of-way. This slide has the full list of the different facility types, and it should mostly be familiar to you. I wanted to point out just a couple of things. We've grouped rain gardens, basins, and planters together. They have a lot of common design requirements and characteristics. We've grouped them together under a section of bioretention, which aligns our use of the term with a lot of other jurisdictions and how they're using it. We've also grouped dispersion facilities that spread flow out in sheet flow over a pervious surface. Filter strips, driveway center strips, and downspout extensions. Driveway center strips has been broken out as a separate facility type from filter strips for the first time. I should note eco roofs and permeable pavement, we've always treated them facilities. We used to refer to them as impervious area reduction techniques, and that's gone away. Again, they're facilities as always. The tree credit is no longer available for stormwater credit on private property, although as Ivy will talk about it, it remains available for right-of-way projects. And then the only other thing under number 5, other facilities, we now have surface sand filters back in the SWIM. They weren't in the SWIM in 2016. They're for very limited use in circumstances where a planted facility isn't viable, say if there's too much shade. there we go. Sorry. For eco-roofs, the biggest changes are really due to the appearance a couple of years ago of the Central City 2035 eco-roof requirements. And that's resulted in updated language concerning planning and zoning requirements. There's new guidance for sizing eco-roofs that cover just part of the roof. Eco-roofs covering at least 60% of the roof are exempt from infiltration testing requirements. It's also called the eco-roof exception. And for the first time, the manual has some additional language about systems that have more than 6 inches of media, or 4-inch depth is still the standard for eco-roofs. For basins and planters, the biggest changes, we now, for all systems with under drains, including sim basins and planters, require 24 inches of blended soil. That's to increase the stormwater retention, but also the water available to plants in the summer in those systems with under drains. This also includes systems with rock galleries. And for simple infiltration systems where our blended soil is imported and placed on top of native soil, the maximum allowable depth of imported soil is now 12 inches to allow the plant roots to get down into the native soils, again, for summer plant health. Swales have been removed as a separate facility type. There's been confusion over the years. The cross-section for bioretention swales, distinct from grassy swales. The cross-section for bioretention swales has been confused with the cross-section for basins because they're so similar. So if you're looking for design criteria for bioretention swales, it's been incorporated into the basin section. Lined basins aren't allowed anymore under the SIM because we've had so many problems with implementation, including design and construction issues for these systems when they're not, when they're done by non-professionals, dealing with those pesky issues about properly installing liners. Those are the main changes. Oops. Trying to get the hang of this. A major change, there's a big change to the standard underdrain configuration that's required for presumptive and performance approaches. Any of you who used our 2016 manual know that the standard underdrain, including the rock gallery encasing the underdrain, extended the full length and breadth of the facility. The new design calls for a substantially shortened underdrain, and the pack will spit out the dimensions for you. It's a standard slotted underdrain. It's a well casing material that's commonly available. No longer will whoever's constructing it have to actually drill holes in the pipe. There's a single aggregate surrounding the underdrain pipe instead of the 2-layer system, which was standard before. That's quarter number 10 angular aggregate that's commonly available. It's what we use to sand the streets in the winter. Again, the shortened under length. And a lot of this is about increasing the soil volume, the retention, and improved summertime plant health. And this has been years in the making. We installed a significant pilot project a couple of years ago that we're still monitoring. And we built this on top of the experience of the city of Seattle, which has used a similar system for over a decade. We have a new requirement for orifice controls to control the discharge from bioretention facilities. And we're among a number of cities that are either investigating this or doing it, including Gresham and some other cities in Oregon. So orifice controls, which are typically just a small round hole, often drilled in the cap for an underdrain, is going to be required for most presumptive and performance approaches, with a new minimum orifice size of 3/8 of an inch. If for instance, it's on the end of an underdrain and all the flow passing through the orifice is effectively filtered. There's no change in the minimum size of orifices if they're taking some flow that isn't filtered, say in a large storm overflow. The minimum size is still 1 inch. and with some protection such as screening required. Of course, for these new small orifices, access is key for visual observations and for maintenance. The swim provides some configuration suggestion, but the responsibility for coming up with an accessible, maintainable system, a useful configuration is squarely on the shoulders of the designer. A couple of new facility types, driveway center strips, I mentioned those already, but they're allowed in all soil types with different covers, including grass and gravel. We're hoping that they'll be more widely used with the improvements in the additional criteria. For surface sand filters, I mentioned them previously, they're for very limited use, only with approval by BES, and they do have almost identical cross-section to a regular planter. A couple of new details there on the right. At the request of designers over time, there's a new simple check dam detail, and there's a new flow dissipator detail. Again, it's voluntary but recommended in larger facilities to spread the flows when they enter the facility. That's what the flow dissipator is. Filter strips. The technical basis for filter strips, and of course, sheet flow is everything in these for distributing and dispersing the flows. The technical basis has really been gone through from top to bottom in an attempt to better ground these, the technical basis for these, but also allow their use more widely. So filter strips are allowed under the SIM and the performance approaches. Applicability has been expanded to area contributing areas larger than 500 square feet. There's sizings that allows them in all soil types. And some of the criteria, for example, the maximum width of the impervious area draining to the strip is 12 feet, and the maximum slope for that impervious area is 6%. So there are sizing tables for both the simplified and the performance approaches, and you can see the sizing table for the simplified approach there on the lower right, where if your slope is less than 10% and your infiltration rate is higher than 2 inches per hour, then you get a sizing ratio, and that's the width of the filters, the vegetated filter strip, sizing ratio of 2/3. Dry wells. The biggest change for dry wells is to the sizing table, and similar to filter strips, our engineer Amy has gone through all the technical bases for the sizings. So there's a new maximum SIM catchment area of 5,000 square feet, and in many cases, as a designer, you'd be able to use the same size dry well that you have been in the past, but in some cases, the dry well is going to have to be slightly larger. There's also additional guidance on performance approach designs for dry wells, including dry wells under buildings. And finally, for the first time, we have post-construction testing for dry wells. So this would be, for instance, in a case where a designer, where the design initially calls for more than one dry well at a location, and a designer opts to test a first dry well to figure out whether the additional dry wells are needed, or whether the installed dry well actually performs better than the initial small-scale tests indicated. It's important to note BES also will require this kind of testing if setback requirements aren't met. So the criteria cover things like the minimum duration of the test, the type of the test. You can do a standing head test, drawdown test. Covers the safety factor, and then it covers the all-important extent to which you can extrapolate the results of the post-construction test to the performance of the larger dry well.
So chapter 4 includes the design requirements for facilities that are allowed in the right-of-way. The requirements for all the vegetated facility types. Previously, swales, planters, and curb extensions are combined into one section, now called vegetated stormwater facilities, also known as green streets. Slight changes have been also made to manufactured treatment devices, tree credit, and structured detention sections. We're moving, as Henry mentioned, we're moving away from the term swale and the right-of-way when the facility is behind the curb line. We're calling it a planting strip or a furnishing zone facility, and that can be configured as a planter or a facility with side slopes. And for those facilities, it's most likely that you'll use the sloped facility worksheet to design them and size them, or potentially the basin setting. So next slide. So the organization for the vegetated facility section has a new subsection for site design guidance that reflects the best practices that PBOT and BES have been using over the years. And this includes new sections for guidance on site coordination for future development, tree coordination, utility coordination. All of the curb extension specific and planting strip specific information is organized into respective sections. And that includes information for maximum and minimum lengths and widths for those two facility types. There is the section for guidelines for stormwater design. And this section has new information, including how to measure ponding depth, new inlet and forebay requirements, and the new underdrain configuration specifications that Henry mentioned. Next slide. The new site design guidance section adds more guidance for pedestrian circulation around curb ramps and sidewalks, including when a barrier might be needed for pedestrian safety. There are new maintenance access suggestions to address safety of workers and facilities, the maintenance workers. And all of these guidelines are intended to improve safety for pedestrians, and in particular, the visually impaired, and also safety for vehicles and maintenance staff. Next slide. So a big change that maybe some people have heard about is with the swale type configuration, side slope configuration. BS has found that facilities with side slopes have maintenance challenges, including plant mortality on those slopes and soil migration leading to undermined sidewalks. Additionally, the configuration is not in a very efficient use of the right-of-way for stormwater management. Not very much of the footprint is actually used for stormwater management. Next slide. So for a facility with side slopes, there is a new requirement for a 2-foot flat bottom at the bottom of the facility and a thickened curb and sidewalk detail where the slope meets the sidewalk. So when the ponding depth of the facility is 9 inches, this configuration would require an 11-foot, 6-inch wide planting strip. So there's not a whole lot of places where this configuration probably applies. However, there are 4 options to use that are still very acceptable for an 8-foot wide planting strip. There is the most common and popular solution, the swaleter, and then there's the efficient planter that can be used at corners where parking removal might be preferred by PBOT. for sightline issues. And then you could also use the planter with the 2.5 foot wide step out zone where parking is needed. So there is not an expectation that additional right of way dedication will be needed for this change. The intention is that the facility design would change, not the right of way dedication. Next slide. So for facilities in the planting strip, there's more detailed requirements for inlets, and we found that water making that 90-degree turn often bypasses the inlet. So these inlet tables are intended to make sure that the water gets into the facilities more efficiently. There are 3 tables in Chapter 4 to use for sizing or for deciding how many inlets your facility needs. And the tables, first you determine your design storm that you're designing to, and then catchment area and slope. And winter above 6% slope, there's a requirement to use the new detail, the concrete inlet type metal with G1 or G2 grate. It's pictured on the slide, and that allows for the water to not only turn into the facility, but also to drop into the grate and then go into the facility. There are also some new inlet requirements for curb extensions, some guidance. There's not tables, it's not as detailed as the planter or planting strip facility. Next slide. So a couple other inlet changes. The inlet for the curb extension, which is now detail P301, has been modified so that the metal inlet is perpendicular to the curb rather than at an angle. There's a new detail P306, the notched 4-bay wall for curb extensions. I see I have a typo there. And that is for use on streets with high sediment. And there's a list in Chapter 4 about what street classifications this will be used on. There's a companion detail SW310 that is the planter version of the notched 4-bay. Next slide. I'm not going to get into detail on these underdrawing configuration changes because Henry spoke about them, and the changes he talked about, the orifice, the change to the aggregate and to the pipe also apply in the right of way. So I don't think there's anything different than what he mentioned in his slides that would have changed for the right of way. Next slide. So due to construction and maintenance problems, we don't have the wood check dam detail anymore. We are moving to just concrete check dams. There's been an evolution in check dams over the years, and this is where we've landed for various reasons. There are new details included for the check dams that correspond with the different configurations. So if you have a rock gallery, or if you have a line facility with, with a slotted under drain discharge. So there are new details to correspond because there'd been a lot of guessing about what to do with check dams over the years. Next slide. So the typical details, the SW numbered series, remain in the manual. They've been formatted to 11 by 17 sheets. And these are the details that are meant to be modified for your specific project. So these are not cut and paste, but have the design guidance for the designer to figure out how to modify it to their site. There are a couple new ones that are highlighted in red. And then there have been some modifications to the facilities listed, highlighted in orange. Next slide, please. And then the training number 4 on February 4th, where Henry and I will talk more about private facility and public facilities. I'll get into a little bit more detail about all of the changes that have been made to the details. So 15 of the details that used to be in the manual have been moved to the City of Portland standard construction details. So these are the P series now, P300 series. They can be found on the PBOT website with the rest of the City of Portland standard details. So this is to provide consistency for construction and maintenance staff. Things had diverged over the years with different implementers. Most of the details haven't changed. There's just a few changes to the details highlighted in orange. And then there's a couple new ones like the inlet type metal with G1 or G2 grate that I mentioned earlier. So those are always also in the standard details. Next slide. So for MSTTs, not any big changes there. We've clarified the requirement to size them to manage the full catchment area and to install a sedimentation maintenance hole as pre-treatment. And this is just to standardize maintenance and design practices across the Bureau. And then next slide. And my last slide about tree credits. The tree credit, as Henry mentioned, only applies in the right-of-way. We've modified and simplified the credit calculation given per tree. So it might look like less credit per tree, but at the same time, we've also removed the maximum % of impervious area that can be managed with the tree credit. So it balances itself out. And we've also, it also just works better for linear applications like the right-of-way. And so we have a simplified tree credit worksheet that I think everyone will find handy. That is my last slide. I will stop. Well.
Do you want me to request control, Adrian?
Yeah, I think.
That worked. That's so weird. Okay, good. I think you have control, Alice.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Okay. Hi, my name is Alice Coker, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about drainage reserve requirements in the 2020 SWIM. These are not new requirements. They've actually been around for quite some time. We've done a lot of work to try and clarify these existing requirements, but most notable, what you'll notice is that we've consolidated them all now into one chapter, chapter 5, where previously in the 2016 SWIM, they were scattered throughout the manual. Let's see if this works. Okay. Well, I don't know, maybe not. Well, maybe did she leave? Okay.
No, I'm here. Did it go?
Okay.
Oh, there it goes.
Oops. There we go. All right. I think I have control now. Let me try. Hold on. Yes. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Okay, so we've added these 2 new sections, applicability and exemptions, and these new sections help clarify when drainage reserves are placed. So typically, drainage reserves are not placed when there are other protections in place that are adequate. So for example, these are generally affiliated with zoning code. So we generally do not place drainage reserves in the environmental protection overlay zone because these protections are adequate and generally, but we do place drainage reserves when we find them in the environmental conservation overlay zones. Well, I did have it. No, don't kidding. That's so weird. Well, I don't know what to say. Perhaps Adrian, do you mind just, oops. Maybe she's not here. Okay, we're at the next slide. Allowable activities. So allowable activities or encroachments. We've added this section to help clarify when it's now allowable to do certain things in drainage reserves that have a relatively low impact. And this will no longer require a full review. Previously in the 2016 SWIM, we had 3 of these that are listed were available. For example, the construction of soft surface trails, maintenance and repair of culverts and water crossing structures, and installation of single outfalls of 4 inches or smaller. But now with this manual, we've expanded that list of activities to include all of these.
Alice just want me to do it.
Yes, please. Thank you. I don't know what's going on. Okay, thanks. We've clarified our mitigation requirements for drainage reserve. So mitigation requirements kick in if there is an encroachment into the reserve. And previously we were silent on what the mitigation practice was. Now we've clarified that permanent disturbances mitigate at a ratio of 1.5 to 1, whereas temporary disturbances mitigate at a ratio of 1 to 1. We've also clarified our planting densities based on feedback that we received through the public review process and the internal review process. So now planting densities are reduced to better match practices and restoration plantings. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we've improved our design criteria. Site analysis or design criteria requirements apply to projects that propose to alter or move a drainage way. And the level of analysis required is based now on the complexity of the project, the proposed impacts and the potential risks and channel size. We've added also a new section that has some guidance for crossings, bridges, and culverts. Next slide. We've improved our submittal requirements, and these are now also better tailored to the level of impact to the drainage reserve. And in addition to the submittal requirements, so these include both engineering analysis and survey requirements. So now survey requirements are based on the location of the disturbance to the drainage reserve, and also survey requirements are reduced when the impact to the reserve is relatively low. And similar to the engineering calculations, less hydraulic analysis is now required for when the disturbance in the reserve is temporary, it does not adversely impact the existing grading, and does not result in the construction of a new channel. Next slide. This is a new form that we've added, and it's for recording onto the property with the county when a drainage reserve exists. So previously in the 2016 SWIM, we were using a operations and maintenance form to record against the county. And so in some circumstances, we identify a drainage reserve and place it. However, there's not necessarily any construction happening on the drainage way or within that reserve. And so it didn't make sense to record an O&M against the property since no maintenance or planting activity was occurring at that time. So we've created this new form that seems more appropriate for acknowledging that the drainage reserve exists. However, there's no maintenance requirements yet until an encroachment occurs. Okay, I think that's it. Next slide, I think it's Henry. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So chapter 6 has our vendor list submittal requirements. We've grouped together application requirements for manufactured stormwater treatment devices. We call them MSTTs. Different jurisdictions call them a lot of things, but storm filter would be one of the examples. Also, application requirements to be a vendor of our blended soil for stormwater facilities. So for the MSTTs, there's a link, of course, to the list of approved devices that's online, and that's what usually people consult. It's, again, the list of approved devices is on our SWIM website. You should be able to find it easily. And the approvals contain use conditions that go along with the approval. So there are some significant updates to the requirements for people applying for BAS approval for a water quality treatment device in the city of Portland. And there's more detail about BES's decision-making criteria and those conditions of use, including a new requirement for more field documentation of O&M requirements. Many of you may be aware that there's kind of a proliferation of these devices with companies coming forward with new devices for review under the Washington Tape Protocol, and which often head our way afterwards for approval in the city of Portland. For the BES blended soil for stormwater facilities, which isn't required in most facilities, as Ivy mentioned, there has been a very minor change in the components of the blend. But most importantly, the list really hasn't changed. And of course, chapter 6 has a link to again, it's online, that list of vendors on our website. And the application requirements remain the same in terms of the new specification we put in place in 2019, which is just a variation on the old specification. Okay, I think our last slide is next. Oh, we have, sorry, definitions and appendices. This section contains the updated definitions. I think there are a fair number of updated definitions. Hopefully they're more useful. They're aligned with the Sewer and Drainage Facilities Design Manual and Code 1738. Appendix A has the Stormwater Design Appendix has been updated to match engineering changes, including the new PAC methodology. Appendix B covers culverts and outfalls. No big changes there. And Appendix C, resources and references, has been substantially updated with revised links. Okay.
All right, and then we just wanted to put the training schedule back up here to remind everybody that these trainings are coming up, and to direct you to our website where you can find those links and register for them.
Adrienne,
All
can
right.
I add one thing?
Yeah.
I'm gonna launch a poll. I have two questions. One is if there's any questions in these, if there's any topics in these upcoming trainings that you particularly want us to focus on. So that's the first question. And then the second poll, I'll just close it after we talk for a few minutes, is a list of topics if you're interested in having more of a 101 on something. That might get it. So like, for example, if we were going to talk about public facilities, we could also include a little bit of information, a 101 about permitting, facility design, and submittal requirements, and get into a little bit more detail about that one subject in a 101 style. So those are my two questions that I'll throw out there. And, but I think then I'll let Adrienne take it back. Hopefully it goes up.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Great. So I'll just leave it for a little while. You can look it over, and then I'll just post the other one here in a minute as we chat.
Great. Is it helpful to leave this slide up, or should I stop sharing? I think maybe the topics are helpful to put up. So now we're into the Q&A portion. I think Henry, if you can watch if people have questions, you can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you. But yeah, and then I think we'll also get into a lot more detail in these subsequent trainings. So we hope that you'll be able to enjoy it. Join us for those. And thank you everybody for your patience with our technical challenges today. And then should we keep recording the Q&A?
Oh, I can turn that off. I'll stop recording.
I think you should keep recording, please.
Okay.
There's some good information that comes from people's questions and answers.
There is, that's true. Any particular questions popping up there, Henry?
I don't see anything, but Tom
Okay.
must have at least 10.
All right, well, let's see, we'll give it a couple minutes if people just want to say hi at all. I'm gonna stop my screen share now. And we don't have any more content, so if people are, oh, Tom's raised his hand unless he forgot to put it down from his testing earlier.
And there
And
are
I
a
have
couple
a couple-
questions now in the chat.
Okay, great.
So how do you want to do this? Raise hand or just put questions in the chat?
Either one, whatever you prefer.
Okay.
Should we start with Fred's question?
Oh, hang on. Henry,
Yeah,
I'm gonna let you moderate
my
for
question
it.
is, will the City of Portland special provisions or the standard specs be updated to reflect the swim changes? I do a lot of public projects, and sometimes I get comments like, oh, the soil's changed, but there's no special provision created, as an example.
I can answer the particular question about the soil spec. The Red Book is being updated. But Fred, presumably you have access to our special specs that would give you the latest, even if, say, before the Red Book is updated?
Is there coordination with the special provisions? Like typically that would be brought into the special provisions and then everybody's got the latest. But if not, you're saying to go directly to BES to get the latest spec language?
I think that's right.
Okay. And then of course, other terminologies for some of the planters along the side of the road. The specs have language with current terminologies, but it sounds like you're creating some new facility types. Will that be reflected in the special specs, city standard specs and the like?
Yeah, Ivy, do you want to answer that?
Sorry, I was focusing on the my poll because you know it's all flashy things. But I think the question was about the right-of-way specifications being reflected in the COP.
Correct.
What we call the Red Book. Yes, that should be updated. There is a new one that I believe is coming out shortly if it hasn't been published yet. Totally
Perfect.
updated. And if Ashley or Colleen want to say anything about it, you're welcome to pipe in. But we think we have incorporated all the specials that we used to use into the new regular specifications, and the pipe and the aggregate and different things should be included. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a coordination between PBOT BES issue in relation to stormwater management. But yeah, I mean, as long as it's being updated, that's going to be better.
Yeah.
I have a question, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay, well, we'll call on you unless it's about the specifications, Colleen. Is it about that?
I don't want to talk about that.
Okay. Okay, so the next person is Kathleen, and she has a question about the blended soil and the infiltration rate. Will this be considered the long-term infiltration rate of the blended soil?
Yeah, and the answer to that is yes, that will be considered the long-term infiltration rate for the blended soil. We based that change on some field tests that we did of facilities that had been in the ground for a period of time, and they were showing much higher infiltration rates than our 2 inches per hour assumption.
Okay, and then the question just came up for me. Been working with Clackamas County, and they always have been following City of Portland for their growing medium infiltration rate. And right now, they're not allowing it because they say that 6 inches per hour is probably not the long-term infiltration rate of it. So they just question that and are still requiring per hour for the blended oil.
Okay, looking at the two, yeah, and we have, you know, it's not like a formal peer review study, but we have a report of that testing if they're interested in getting it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I
All
think
right.
actually Tom has a question. He had his hand up earlier, and then Colleen is after Tom.
Thank you, Ivy. I have a question regarding the guidance in the manual for when a designer or how a designer determines whether they should use a vegetated infiltration facility versus a dry well, as well as on private property, and the decision that's used in the public right-of-way. Is that in the manual that I would be able to find how you recommend or require that I use one or the other?
I don't think we necessarily recommend or require. I think in the right-of-way in the stumped area, BES is prefers sumps at this point because of long-term maintenance concerns. And then on private property, it's really on a case-by-case basis, and it's based on the overall design of the project.
Okay, so then the answer, another way to simplify that would be that no, there's no guidance or requirement.
Not.
It's up to the designer to decide what they want, except in the right-of-way, BES may require a sump versus a rain garden. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
So if I wanted to do a rain garden instead of a dry well in a street that I'm working on, I may not be able to do that.
That's correct.
And that's because of documented information about the difficulty of using a rain garden versus a dry well. You have some kind of documentation to show that the maintenance issue of a rain garden in the street is a burden on BES greater than the burden of a dry well, the maintenance burden of a dry well versus the maintenance burden of a vegetated facility. Is that correct? You have documentation that that's the case?
I would say, I mean, I don't have a written documentation that I could give you right now, but I have a lot, we have a lot of information on the main.
You have written information. I mean, is this documented that you've gotten feedback from somebody that is the situation and you need to, in certain neighborhoods, you would use a sump, and in certain neighborhoods where you couldn't use a sump and you used a vegetated facility, they would have to use a vegetated facility, not necessarily for 100% infiltration. So what I'm getting at is what's happening is in the east side where dry wells are preferred by whoever these people are, they are not used or required in other parts of the city where the only way you can do it is with a rain garden. And so it's posing the benefits of the vegetated facilities are not being realized for the people that are on the east side. They're just getting an old sump. It's underground, out of sight, out of mind. They don't get any extra vegetation or reduced impervious area or anything like that. It's just, so obviously you can tell I'm I'm opposed to this practice. So I'm wondering, how do I address that as public input? How do I get you information that can help you perhaps reevaluate this decision? Or was it your decision, or was it the director's decision, or was it somebody in maintenance decision that said, okay, you guys, when it comes to these, so in other words, who's the person that says, okay, you have to do a sump or not? And I don't really care who it is. Is it you guys or is it somebody else? That would be an easy enough answer.
I'd say it's a collective decision across the Bureau that we're part of that conversation, Tom, but we're not the sole decision makers on that, but it's a discussion that has happened amongst all of those teams in the Bureau, including maintenance, including planning, including design.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one last thing.
Yeah.
So who would a person contact about the issue to discuss it further? Is there somebody that's sort of the decision-making person? And I guess that would be the person I'm asking.
Right. Maybe we can get back to you on that answer, Tom.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I had another thought and I lost it. Sorry, but it was about that. Anyway, but we'll get back to you, Tom. We've thought about it a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Do you have another question or
No,
should I
no,
go to Colleen?
that's it. Thank you.
Okay. So Colleen, you're next. You're up.
Oh, she left. She
Oh.
put her actual question in the chat, and she needs names for some folks that are signed in twice for the sign-in sheet.
Okay.
For the attendance sheet.
Any other questions? And I have the polls, engineering design storm. I mean, we'll look at all these in more detail and can focus on some things, but engineering design storm, there was particular interest in that for future, in our future presentations. And the 101s right-of-way, there was interest in right-of-way. There was kind of even interest in all of the subjects. So we'll look at that. Any 101s wouldn't be coming up right away, but you're on our list. We've got your name. Let's see, Wes has a question.
Yeah, this is just kind of a general question. I feel like doing stormwater and site design a couple of years ago, it felt kind of vague between Title 33 and some of the stormwater requirements. Maybe I'm being kind of vague, but from what I recall, just some of the screening requirements, it was a bit nebulous, like if you line a property line with a stormwater planter, and then you have to provide these screening requirements, and the stormwater planter is depressed versus the intent of the screening requirements and the vegetation and or walls, if that's the case, they need to be sticking up above ground. I can't remember what it is, 3 feet or whatever that screening is. Is there better, is there a little bit more clarification on that with this manual in Title 33?
Henry, do you want to say anything about that? I can say a tiny bit from the last manual. Just I would say in the last manual, we expanded the plant list to try to have a bigger list of plants that would fit the requirements both for Title 33 and the screening requirements in Title 33 and the stormwater requirements. So we did do that improvement. I don't know if anything else has been done, Henry, this time around.
Yeah, sorry, I was paying attention to the chat. There weren't significant changes made to the planting list this time around. If that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. But you did, the 2016 plant lists did make some significant updates to that, but that's been around for a while now.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I don't think it's a gap in the Stormwater Management Manual. It's more my personal opinion, the Title 33 hasn't been clear, but it may have been updated since I last looked at it. So it's not, it's just a grievance I have, and I'm just grateful.
Yeah, we're less familiar with Title 33. I think it's a good point that it would behoove the city in general to be better coordinated on things like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. Any other questions?
I'm going to stop the recording now.
That's